Okay, so today we're going to be talking about stress and stress relief, and it's something that it happens a lot, I think, to everybody in everybody's life, and especially, if you're in a profession that, where a lot of things are going on, and given the situation about what's going on, especially now, even though we're at the end of the pandemic, it seems we have other things like, over here in the US, not in the Bahamas probably, but in the US, we're having problems with gas, shortages because, one of the major refineries, has a ransomware attack on them. So it's kind of shut them down. And so the supply is getting tighter. So people are stressed about a whole lot of things. They're stressed about politics. They're stressed about things they see on TV. They're stressed about, everything going on. And so, what does that actually mean? And what does that mean for you? And if you're seeing clients, it's certainly a major thing that clients are concerned about. So, when we talk about stress and having stress, it's actually not things that we have. Recently, as we were talking about before I started the recording, I'd been sick for a couple of weeks. I had the COVID vaccine shot and had very bad reactions to it. So, that kind of gave me the idea on how do you handle these types of situations. And generally, people translate that and say, I have stress. And the thing is, you don't have stress. It's not something that you have. It's not a thing. It's something that you're doing and something that you're creating in yourself, because there's a difference between the way people react to certain situations and the way people react to other situations. And when it's adverse, as opposed to being focused, what's the difference? One is being focused and determined, and the other one is being stressed, right? So we call it stress, even though it's something that we're doing. And if you think about it, stress is a process, because how do you know to have stress? How do you know when you're in a stressful situation as opposed to an exciting situation, or as opposed to a situation that is easily handled? And it really comes down to the way you're talking to yourself, to the way to the pictures that you're making, and to the way you're making yourself feel. And that's really something that became very evident to me when I was in situations that weren't particularly good. I mean, I couldn't walk like more than 50 steps before I had to stop in order to catch my breath. It's a tough situation. You don't know what's going on. And it's often when in the absence of knowing what's going on that the imagination starts taking you into different places, and often not great places. Whereas if there are people, who are very optimistic, who always look at things from the standpoint of glasses half full, that they don't feel that type of stress, right? And it's something that we can control when we know how to do it, and we can teach our clients how to do that as well. And often people say they get overwhelmed, with things, and they keep running these dialogues in their head, and the more they try to stop it, with the emphasis on being try, the worse it gets, because they don't know how to control their senses the way that we're going to be talking about today. So, anybody have, a lot of feel they have a lot of stress in their lives, or, have clients who have a lot of stress in their lives?
Yeah, I have a client that I'm working with right now that is a chronic stressor.
Okay.
Yeah, and
What do you mean by chronic stressor?
well, he will agree, and then he will come back And it's as if, 2 days later, he forgot what he understood or agreed to with regards to, um, taking it easy. Um, and he will he will list off quite a few limiting beliefs about themselves or symptoms of aches, pains, or anxieties, and then um, we will talk, and he will agree and say, "Oh, I feel better now. The anxiety's gone." Da 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 da. And then a day or two later, "Oh, my wife is giving me da 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 da," and so
Okay, so
his depression really, he's a lot of depression, as he says. So
okay, well, that's a slightly different topic. He's stressed about being depressed,
yes,
probably. So really, you could tell him to stop being depressed, and then he won't have stress.
yeah. Well. This is yes, and yeah, I agree with you. And I haven't focused on the stress with him. That's not what I've been focusing on. But the stress then is, as you said, a symptom of other limiting beliefs. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's limiting beliefs. I would suggest that maybe it's just how he's using his brain and what he's concentrating on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
question I would ask him in this case is, well, how do you know to be stressed? How do you know to have stress? Because it's something he's practiced a lot,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so is he stressed all the time? Like if he sees like, if he sees like the ocean, is he thinking that it's going to come and swallow him up? Is he stressed when he's just lying down and in a hammock on the beach, relax, where other people would be relaxed? I mean, because it's how we use our brain and how we make ourselves feel. And when you think about it, I mean, things that certain people find relaxing, certain other people find stressful,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So for me, I grew up in Manhattan. I was born and raised in Manhattan, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I moved out to the West Coast, to the San Diego area, it's a very different type of city, right? Southern California is very different. And my sister lives, has a house in a place called Ocean Beach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those of you who know San Diego know Ocean Beach is a really nice area, and it's right near, realistically, it's a beach town, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you go out in the back of our house, and there's like an alley, because they do things properly out there, unlike in Manhattan, where they, and most cities where they have alleys where you put the garbage and stuff like that, and not on the street like you do in New York, right? Because they don't have these alleys in New York. But I grew up in Manhattan, and alleys generally are not great places to be in New York. They're very narrow, they have rats and generally criminals, right? So, I go out but one good thing about New York and Manhattan, especially, not so much in some other parts, is that it's well lit. I mean, one time I remember driving along Fifth Avenue at night. I didn't realize I didn't have my lights on. And you couldn't tell the difference even if you did, because it's so well lit. And in San Diego, it's not so well lit. So we go out into the back, and even though it's residential and the quote unquote alley is nice and wide and everything like that, you see, it's like it's dark from what I'm used to. And in that case, bad things happen in the dark from where I'm from, right? Not so much over there. But when you think about it, it's how you use your brain and what you get stressed about. For most people, they think it'll be fine. It's not a big deal. Actually, you can see the stars, which
Mm-hmm.
you can't really do in New York. And so it's one of those things that for certain people, certain situations are stressful, right? And for me, again, being from Manhattan, being out in like the countryside in the woods and stuff like that, I find it really stressful.
Hmm.
You know, I'm thinking Blair Witch and stuff like that. You know, I'm not thinking, oh, how nice this is nature and everything like that, because it's I'm out of my element, and therefore I create that type of stress just from what I'm experiencing.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah.
people will tend to create stress in situations where other people wouldn't, or where there really aren't things that would cause stress. So it's not outside things that are causing the stress, it's our reaction to those things that causes stress,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just looking for my notes. Sorry. I thought I was
That's
on
okay.
mute. I thought I was on mute. Looking for my notes with the guy. I was just. I took him back. I took him back to what he thought was some of his uh, uh, sources of the issue of being unnoticed and uncared for and neglected, and went back to his childhood with his mother leaving China, and various things. And I went in and I did a timeline thing with him, and brought him all the way back up to the present and into his future, and it seemed to, for days, like work amazing, right? He was so happy, and da 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 da, and writing and talking, and and sharing. And then he went to see one of his ex-wives even, and she took him in and started caring for him. And I think she started saying that she's a nutritionist of some sort, and started telling him that he's got all these issues, and he's got low vitamin B and blah blah blah, and now he's in bed and depressed with her, and doing all these things. But I thought, so now he starts listing off all of his issues again. Is like, and
Okay, well, in
yeah,
that
yeah.
case, I would suggest, rather than just doing a timeline with him,
Hmm.
ask him how. Okay, so you say you have stress. How do you know?
Right, right. Well,
Right.
okay.
So
Yeah,
so think about it this way, right? So having stress is a strategy. So somebody has to have a process for having stress,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because he doesn't have stress, hopefully, when he's having sex with his many ex-wives. You know?
Right, right,
But
right, right,
if he is, then maybe he has other, yeah, anxieties and performance issues. But hopefully he doesn't. Hopefully he doesn't have stress when he's doing things that he enjoys, right? So there's a different strategy for creating stress in certain situations.
right.
So because he's practiced it, it happens really quickly. He's been practicing it probably his whole life, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So what I would suggest in this case is just ask him, how do you know? Because it's all, when you have a strategy, think of it this way, right? You have a strategy for doing something.
Hmm.
It's after a while, it becomes a pattern,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
So in certain situations, he's going to have stress. In certain situations, he's not going to have stress. And by saying that, he's creating the process, right?
He says,
So,
sometimes he says he wakes up in it. He wakes up in the
well,
mood.
ask him, well, how do you know to do that? He wakes up in the mood to have stress.
That's what he said a few times. I'll clarify.
Well, maybe that's why he has so many ex-wives.
Yeah, but you say, yeah. I mean, so yeah. So I mean, in terms of strategy and pattern, what comes up?
Well, here's the thing: when you ask him, how do you know?
Yeah,
How do you know how to do that?
right,
That he's not do. He has to think about it.
right.
That immediately breaks the pattern and interrupts the pattern,
Mm, hmm.
right? Because when you don't have to think about it, he just falls into the pattern,
Right, right,
right?
right.
So when you
How do you know
slow
that?
it down, how do you say, well, you say you have it. Yes, I have stress. How do you know? How do you know it's not something else? How do you know it's not excitement?
Right, right.
Right? How do you know it's not,
How do you know? Yeah,
yeah, how do you know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And you listen. Well, I feel this and I feel that, and
Well,
yeah,
how do you know to feel it? Right? So what's the first thing you just then ask him, what's the first thing you notice?
just keep going back. Yeah, Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you have to keep peeling it back, right? So, well,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just feel it. It's like, no, you don't just feel it,
What's before that?
right? Because if I punch you in the face, right, you may
Yeah.
just feel the punch, but I actually had to do something in order to get the punch there.
Yeah. What's
Right.
before that? What's before that? All right. I got. Yeah.
So, so
Yeah.
you can ask them, well, is it is it something you feel? Is it something you tell yourself?
Right. Right.
Right? Is it,
Right.
your ex-wife strangling you when you wake up? Who knows? It's, if it's that, then it's not, he doesn't have stress, he's got other problems.
Right. Yeah. I'm gonna try that, James. Thanks, man.
Right? So when you ask him, right, it's generally they're either making a picture or they're talking to themselves,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So you can ask him, well, how do you know? Well, say, well, I'm making a picture of this, right?
Right.
Okay, then what happens? Then I'm doing this. Then I'm doing this, right?
Yeah.
And then those that's once you get into that, once you get into the senses, then you can play with the submodalities. And for those of you who are not familiar with NLP submodalities, it's the characteristics of what we're doing with the senses. So if we're making a picture, it's a color, is it black and white? Is it life size? Is it bigger than life? Is it smaller? Is there a border around it? Or is it there's no border? Are we looking out of our own eyes or are we looking at ourselves in it? Or, is it moving or is it a, a still picture? All of those characteristics. And when you change the characteristics, you change what happens in the brain. It's kind of like a recipe. I know Robert bakes because he showed us that wonderful bread that he made. Baking is a very exact science. In my other capacities, I actually recruited the head chef for modernist cuisine, and there are these books called Modernist Cuisine, and they had one on baking. It's several $100s, but they are actually amazing books about the science of cooking, and in this case, baking. And they're actually, standard textbooks at the Culinary Institute of America. And I had to recruit the head chef for this new book. And wonderful guy, but baking is incredibly scientific, whereas cooking is much more of an art, right? But baking, if you change one thing, you change the outcome of what you get. It's not the same. And so the whole point about baking is that it all goes to consistency. And what we're doing here is really looking at how people bake in their stress. So if the guy's making pictures, these big pictures of bad things happening, well, just shrink them down and move them away and see what happens.
Right.
See
Right.
how that changes his stress level. Because generally, if they're getting stressed about the things that their pictures they're making in their head, they're probably in it. They're very what's called associated, right?
Hmm.
Looking out of their own eyes. Or, they're making big pictures of bad things happening. And then they talk to themselves and talk to themselves about bad things happening. And most of the time, it's not a soothing voice.
Yeah.
It's not something that's, telling them everything's going to be okay. And by actually changing that voice and changing that dialogue, it's very easy to change the outcome. Now, when I say changing that voice, you can substitute that voice
Right.
for somebody else's voice or a funny voice or something like that saying the same thing. I generally, for myself, when I'm working with a client,
Hmm.
I generally will change the voice and then replace the voice. I
Hmm.
like to do several steps on that. So I'll change the voice to something that's, funny or whatever, saying the same thing.
Hmm.
Then I'll change the voice to something that's reassuring and
Right.
giving a better message.
Right. Yeah.
And that generally works well. And I've done it many times actually on the telephone,
Yeah.
not just through video or not just in person, but actually on the phone.
Right. Yeah.
And it works amazingly well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that leads to the next step is they're making a feeling, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So generally they're making a feeling that makes them feel bad,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
when you change that, then you test by checking how are they feeling.
Yeah.
Now, one distinction I would make is that I'm perfectly okay when they feel neutral, right? They don't have to feel exactly the opposite. They don't have to feel great, but as long as they're neutral, right? You get them to a point where they're just okay. They're fine,
Yeah.
that they're not feeling anything. Then you can take it the next step if you want to build in something that makes them feel good, makes them feel energized and motivated in the same situation. But I do it as a step to get them to neutral first, because sometimes it's too big a jump to actually say you're going from being all stressed and feeling really bad to feeling great. So get them to feel neutral first and then say, okay, so what would make you feel better? Right? It's
Well,
like,
well, all right, all right. I did that with him when I was doing the timeline, and he went back to what he said was his source of being told, and he was talking to himself as a little kid, saying he was neglected, and then I had him come in with a different voice, his adult voice. What would the adult? His name was John. John, say to your 6-year-old John, and he,
right, but that's
yeah,
more of a regression technique,
yeah.
right? So this is not really a regression technique.
But he talked about the feelings. He talked about the tightness in his chest and his throat, and et cetera, et cetera. We went through some modalities, right? And as we replaced the voices that he was telling himself with various things, we don't need to go into it here, I guess. He said, "Oh, it's light. My throat feels, my chest feels light." And he was talking about submodality shifts and
Right.
and visions shifts, submodality
Right.
object shifts too. And then he was saying, "I feel wonderful, Matt. Thank you, thank you, thank you." And all this. And I thought, cool. But then
Right. But then you got to future pace them.
I didn't future pace him enough, is what you're saying.
Yeah, you got to take them into the situations because you got to test what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. So he's feeling it in that moment,
Right.
right?
Right.
We got to put him back under the same stress in his own mind in the future, so to see how he's going to react.
I think when he went back to his ex-wife, I think
Oh, I'm sure he did.
he, he, he tested himself big time. He triggered himself because no, she's got a new partner. It's not like he
No, no,
went
no,
back to yeah, yeah,
that's where you test him. So that's where you start pressure testing him and start ramping it up. So now think about the next time you're in this situation, right? And then you notice the feelings of it. But that's why I'm saying get him to neutral. Don't see what happens is when the shift is too big, right?
Mhm.
Between, oh, I feel terrible. Oh, I feel really light and great and everything. I'm going to go and hang out with my ex-wife that gives me stress. Like it's
That's
what happens
exactly
is
what happened.
it's too big a jump,
Yeah, that's what I thought when
right?
I heard that's what he did. Yeah,
Right. It's like somebody they went to the gym, right? They
yeah,
had a good workout and they haven't worked out in a while, but they had a good workout, right?
yeah.
So say they're benching 150 pounds, right? It's like,
Like
yeah, it's really good.
self
Then,
sabotage. Yeah, yeah,
well, then the next time they go, they want to bench 300 pounds. It's not, no, it's
yeah. I thought it was self sabotage when I heard he was already at his wife checked in and she's nursing him. I'm like, what? And telling him everything that's wrong with him, and he's believing it.
well, again, yes, right? So this is where again, you get them to neutral, right?
Mm,
When you get them to neutral, then then when he goes back, if he falls back, he'll fall back to neutral. But neutral is fine because neutral means it's not bothering him. And
right.
then you teach him how to feel good about other situations and the mechanics of that. So this is all about the mechanics of it. It's not about going back into old problems. It's not going back into, doing regression. This is about the mechanics of how somebody creates stress.
In the now, in the present moment.
Well, they're doing it the same way because it's familiar, right? So when you
Bringing a past strategy. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's familiar.
Yeah,
They've
yeah,
practiced it for many, many years,
yeah, yeah.
right? So what I'm saying is, instead of going crazy and, making this huge jump, and that's what I would suggest in any client, rather than making huge jumps. And it's the same thing in persuasion. It's the same thing in anything. It's take the smaller steps, because the smaller steps actually lock in and stack up on each other rather than the huge steps,
Okay.
right?
All right. Yeah. I
Because
got you. Yeah.
what you get is acceptance from the person that you're working, right? So you get them moving a little bit, right, in the right direction, and then you have them verify it for themselves. It's working. Then you move them a little bit more. Oh, how do you feel? I feel better. Good. You lock it in, right? So you're building momentum in the direction that you're taking them, as opposed to just taking them someplace that's totally foreign to them. And what happens is there'll be a tendency to go back to the familiar, because the unfamiliar is scary.
Right.
So if he hasn't practiced feeling good, that is unfamiliar and scary compared to his current state of misery, which is why he went back to his ex-wife, because he's familiar with her. She's not the only nutritionist out there. He could have gone to somebody else.
So we had him feeling good, and he ran back to what he was familiar with. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah, I got you.
And so he fell back into his old pattern.
Isn't that interesting? Wow.
Because it's familiar.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm sure you have ways around the island that and are comfortable with. I'm sure, except in some cases like Hawaii, where there's really only one highway that goes all around Oahu, shockingly enough. And I was there a long time ago. Maybe they finished it by then, but we went all the way where we figured we'd get all the way back around. No, it stops.
It's a dead end.
Yeah, it didn't. They hadn't finished it, so
Oh,
we had to turn around and go back the way we came.
No. We don't have a dead end like that.
Yeah, well,
Wow.
that's what I'm saying, right? So, but generally, right, people will go back into what's familiar. But I'm sure there's other ways around that are not familiar to you. You just don't use them, right? Because they're not as convenient. They're not as familiar.
Right.
Yeah. So I unfortunately know the way to my doctor's office, and and to the place where I was getting all the tests. Even though I didn't go there because I had to go there several times.
Mm-hmm.
I don't always go the way the GPS says to go because they're not familiar. And it's just easier for me to take the road that I'm familiar with. And it's that way with everything else. People will fall back into the familiar. And if they stress themselves and that's familiar to them, they will continue to do that unless you replace that with something else. But it's important to break the pattern first, to interrupt that pattern, right? Because the pattern is easy. The pattern is something they've practiced.
Yeah.
And so that's where the difference is in that case.
Yeah.
Joanne, Robert, you have any other questions comments on this? Because I know you see clients.
Yes. And what I'd like to talk about is myself and the stress that I'm going through right now.
Mm-hmm.
I told you a little bit earlier before we officially started that I have a problem with the new technology. I mean, I'm familiar with Zoom. I know how to get on Zoom. I'm currently writing a book, and the uploading, downloading, side loading, all of that kind of stuff is causing me a lot of stress.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you know it's not stress and not inconvenience? Because if it was something that was just totally convenient, right, and you could just hit one button and have it done.
Wow.
Right? Would
Inconvenient. Never thought of it that way before.
Hello, Tony.
Yeah.
right? So maybe it's just inconvenient.
Or it's the learning curve that,
Well, here's the thing. You've learned a lot in your life.
yes.
At one, you speak English. There's many people who don't speak English, but at one time you didn't speak anything, and you learned.
Mm-hmm.
You learned how to be a hypnotist.
Right.
At one time, you weren't a hypnotist that you knew of.
I like that.
I
knew
love
of.
that phrase that you knew of.
And yet now you are.
Yes.
At one time, you hadn't started writing a book. And yet now you are.
Mm-hmm.
So is it the technology or just something that you're telling yourself, or you're making a big picture about it, that's saying, oh, well, it's different than anything else? Because I've written 2 books, and it's not that easy in a certain sense. And in a certain sense, once you find your rhythm on how to do it, it's actually very easy,
Mm-hmm.
because it's all in the mindset that you put into it. So so let me ask you this. How do you know it's stress? And how do you know it's just not something that you're telling yourself it's difficult and inconvenient?
Mm.
Right? So think about it. What's the first thing you think of when you're thinking of, let's say, the Zoom thing, because that seems to be a big thing. And, or is it just, being pissed off at the guild?
Maybe. No, I
That's a
don't.
good question.
That's a good question. It's,
They do give out very pretty certificates, I have to say.
yeah, they used to give out wooden plaques.
Well, I was late to the party, so I only have the certificate. It's quite pretty. It's very much like those old time stock certificates.
Yes.
It's very nice.
But
Wallpaper the office with.
yeah, I'm very good with doing presentations. I have no
Right.
problem with doing a presentation. I mean, I can do a 15-20 minute talk at the drop of a hat without any notes,
Right.
if it's a topic that I know about. But it's I'm not even feeling anxious about doing the presentation on Zoom. What I'm feeling is anxious about, will I be able to upload it to the cloud? Will I be able to send it to the guild? Will I be able to record it properly on Zoom?
Okay. So that's the dialogue you're having,
Yes.
right? Okay. So when you're thinking about it, are you seeing a picture of like Zoom being broken or something like that, or not working? Or
I
you know,
picture myself not being able to access it properly.
okay, well, that'll start it. Yeah, that'll give you stress, right? So are you looking at yourself not being able to access it properly, or are you looking out of your own eyes?
I'm looking at it as myself not being able to access it.
So you're looking at like a picture of yourself not being able to access
Yes.
it. Okay. Now,
It's disassociation.
then what happens? Are you then you s- then what are you saying something to yourself?
I'm saying, I don't know why I have to do this. Why do I have to learn this?
Well, because it's the guild is making.
Right.
Which is okay. So, but that's really the answer. But that's the wrong question,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you think about it, if you ask a better question, you get a better answer. So now let's play a game a little bit. Okay, so you know how to work Zoom,
Yes.
right? So that part is already taken care of,
Right.
right? So imagine yourself looking at yourself accessing Zoom, because you do it. You did it
Yes.
today,
I did it tonight. Right.
so no problem there,
Right.
right? So then imagine yourself hitting the record button and giving your presentation. Pretty easy, right?
Yes.
So one question I would ask you is when you're asking yourself, why do I have to do this? It's because,
If I want to do a presentation, I have to do this.
well, think of it this way. If you have this, you'll be able to reuse it for other stuff. Right?
Yeah.
So I would ask you this, why wouldn't you want to do it? Because if you have something to say, it's worth recording.
Yes.
Right? So then it gets towards the part where you're thinking about it may be difficult to upload, right?
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, a little bit out of the stress, but this is something I do regularly in corporate type of stuff, right? I find experts. That's what I do. I find experts. And basically, in this case, you don't need an expert, because when you record it in Zoom, right, and you have you can set it to either record on your computer, but they want it in the cloud, which is why they wanted
Right.
they wanted the professional level, right? So
Mhm.
Zoom does an automatic recording, right? So when you have you just do the setting that says record to the cloud,
Right.
and it records to your account, where you can download the recording. So you have a copy. You can also share the recording,
Right.
and then you can send it to the guild with no problem. Right? So there's an option there. It says share, and then it gives you a thing to copy, and you just email them the link, and they get to download it, and it's their problem then.
When you're recording this, James,
Yes,
where do you have a one of those pro accounts?
I do. Otherwise, we couldn't do 2 hours. We can only do 45 minutes.
Right. So, so you have a pro account and you're recording this now. Do
I
you
am.
upload it to your Facebook page? Do you upload it to YouTube? What do you do
Yes,
with this
I do.
recording?
Yeah, that's why you could see it on the Facebook or the YouTube on the replay. We tend to get a lot more people watching on the replays than who show up,
Mhm.
oddly enough. But we've had well over a couple hundred people actually watch the replays, which is great.
Well, I like the live because you have the interaction.
So do I. It makes it much more easy.
Mhm.
So think about it this way. Now you're thinking about your presentation that you're going to be doing for the guild, right? How do you feel?
Excited.
Right. So what's the difference between excited and stressed?
Yeah.
It's all in the value you put to the feeling.
I'm excited that I'm going to learn something new.
Right.
Oh, I have another question for you, technically.
Sure.
If you didn't, or what they suggested was a lot of people were grumbling about going to a pro account. And what they suggested was you have
Not because I actually bought a little bit of stock a while ago.
what they suggested was, well, you have the pro account, you do your presentation in August,
Mhm.
and then if you want, cancel the pro account.
Yeah, you can cancel it.
What happens to your recordings if you cancel the pro account?
Well, you can download it beforehand.
Yeah.
You can download it to your computer beforehand.
Right.
The reason for the recording and getting the pro is that if you don't have pro, I don't think the record option is there on the free one.
No, it is, but on your computer, not on the cloud.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you don't want it to eat up that much space on your hard drive.
Right.
Oh, okay.
But it's just easier for them if you record it to the cloud and then send them a link because they could download it. Like I said, then it's their problem.
Right.
So don't worry about it. But I would suggest download everything that you have. You can get a portable hard drive or something like that to store it on. That's what I do. but I use it for clients as well. And so it's just, I've done trainings on Zoom, but larger than these. So, it works out well.
It's
And
something new.
it's they try to make it as easy as possible. Look, you got this far. It's just another step,
Yeah.
a small one. It'll be fine. And then you'll probably be able to see more clients too.
You're going to need a credit card. Do you have a credit card?
Yeah, I have a credit
Yeah,
card.
of course.
Well, I mean, not, so I know people that don't have credit cards.
Well, you live in the Bahamas.
They're making it illegal to use credit cards to buy groceries here now, as all the credit card companies are going belly up. Well, because people aren't paying their credit card bills because they don't have jobs.
Yeah, well, that'll be an issue.
Mm.
But that's, again, now when things open up, it should open up nicely because it's a very tourist-based economy, unfortunately. But you're seeing in other places where that's opening up too. So, again, people will have stress over that, but then there's also people, they look for opportunities when things are tough. So you can talk to yourself about, oh, things are hard, things are difficult, and why is this happening to me, or all that stuff. If you change the question and take it back to the process of what's going on, you'll allow yourself to open up options. Most of the time people have stress because when they create stress for themselves, they don't see different options. They see one thing. And it's when you step back from it. In most cases, people are looking out of their own eyes. Step back, have them look at themselves. They'll be able to see different options. It's just getting out of the weeds sometimes of being inside their own minds. Right? So that is one of the other areas. Now, another way to do it in like Richard's situation. Richard, are you still there? Because he's probably driving. So hopefully he's listening. And
yeah, I can hear you.
One of the big stressful things is buying and selling a house.
Yeah.
Right. So for those of us who've bought and sold houses, it can tend to be a bit stressful, especially if you're not finding exactly what you want. Now, a lot of times, it's really important to actually control your state in order to be able to influence the other person. So let's say, for example, if you're Matt, if you're getting frustrated with your client, it's important to control your state. Robert and Joanne, when you're working with your clients, it's important to control your state. And equally, Richard, it's important to control your state because it's very easy to be influenced by somebody else's stress.
Yeah.
Right? Because they are going to be putting their stress on you because you're the guy who's there. So having really good state control is also very important. And when you manage your state, you influence the other person's. So it's important to put aside how you create stress for yourself because they'll create plenty of it for you. Right? So that's why it's important, in my opinion, to use curiosity. Right? What's going on with this person? How do they do this? Right? How do they know to do this? And Joanne, as we saw, as we just did it, a bit of humor. Because humor breaks the pattern. It interrupts the pattern. And so that's why I would say it's really very useful to be a bit provocative when you're talking to your clients or you're talking to your, even in a sales situation, to joke with them about things, because it creates a rapport that's a little bit different from the sales rapport, or the therapy rapport. It's rapport of just two people. And that allows you then to shift modes back and forth, because it's in that oscillation that actually you have a real conversation with the person. It doesn't sound like you're doing therapy or you're taking people through interventions or things like that. It's just a conversation, and then you're able to influence the person and say, like we did, Joanne, just now, let's play with this a little bit. Let's have some fun with this, right? Which takes it out of being such a big problem too. It changes the submodality on it. That's why when I'm teaching and things like that, people will say, oh, do you want to practice? Do you want to practice? I don't use the word practice because it has a connotation, right? When we're in a seminar or something like that, and people saying practice, it sounds like hard work, right? Well, I always say, let's play with it, because that's a different connotation, right? So, again, I would use some humor to, interrupt the patterns, right? Be a little provocative, because when you're provocative, you're actually stimulating neurotransmitters, right? Sometimes, one time I saw Richard have somebody on stage, and, who was really feeling overwhelmed. And he said a couple of things, nothing bad or anything, but like mispronouncing her name, even though he knew her name. And anybody who's been to the seminars, there's a name tag. It's right there. But he knows her, and he purposely mispronounced it because he knew she hates it. And she was in trance, and you could see she was getting pissed. I mean, really pissed, but she was still in trance because he wanted to stimulate adrenaline to snap her out of her state. And that's why, if you use something that's a little bit provocative, right? If you use, if you make jokes like I was doing with Matt about this guy's, and his ex-wife and all that type of thing, it creates a different reaction. You're provoking reactions that are different from what they're used to, but then you can lock them in, right? You remember how to do anchoring, right, Matt?
Yeah.
Well, anchor them in, right? So that's where you can keep hitting that, getting that reaction in different situations through the anchor. Right. And that's how it makes it easier for you to work with your clients, as opposed to always doing the heavy lifting of taking them all the way through a timeline exercise.
Right.
So it depends. Not every intervention is going to work for every person. So think in terms of, everything that we do in hypnosis and NLP, it's very modular. So if you're noticing that you're not having the effect that you want, just shift it to something else. Because they all work together. All the pieces work together. As long as you're taking them in the same direction that you want to go, they're not going to know the difference. Right? So if you start with a timeline and then you switch to a swish pattern, or you switch, it's kind of, or changing the submodalities, it's kind of like, the person not going to say, well, no, you didn't finish the timeline.
Right.
They don't care. The client doesn't care as long as you get them the result. Right. And it's the same way, essentially. I know for Richard's clients, they want the house, and, I don't know how it is in Canada, but here, the housing market is tight. I mean, I got a text the other day, somebody like talking about, hey, I got somebody who wants to buy your house. I don't even know how they got my number. And they're sending me a text about, a real estate transaction, I don't even know who these people are, right? And I get a lot of things, about, in the mail. Joanne, I don't know if you're getting them, but I'm getting them. Where like these realtors are saying, "Oh, I just sold, your neighbor's house in 4 days." It's like, well, that's nice. I was wondering whose truck that was. you it's just one of those things, though, where the market's really tight, which causes a lot of stress for the clients. And that's where I think, Richard, in this case, state control on the part of your team and yourself when you're dealing with clients under stress is going to be extremely important, right? So you have to keep their spirits up when they don't get it and all that type of thing. And that's where reframing comes in really well. So if they don't get the house, it's like, well, that might not have been the house for you, right? That might not have been the right house. When I was looking for my house, there was a beautiful house that was actually totally done. I would have had to put minimal into it. Um, the guy who was selling it was under a lot of pressure to sell because he had already bought a bigger house because he had a large family. And, I was very close to making an offer on it. And I probably would have got it for a really good price. And, obviously I'd probably be selling it right now for a really good price because it would have been a great, great investment. But, practical reasons. So it was a large house with a large plot of land that I just don't do gardening. I grew up in Manhattan. You don't have to garden in Manhattan. There's no gardens. That's Central Park. You leave it to them. But, this was like a quarter acre. What am I going to do with a quarter acre? I don't even like to hang out outside. Right. So, it's kind of not, from the investment standpoint, I do regret not getting it, but it wasn't really the right house for me for like living. so, and I understand that. But all told, it's just one of those things that when you reframe something like that, it's like, well, you know what? It's like when you look at all your criteria, yes, that would have matched most of them, but there's still other things to consider, right? And then you just again start moving them along in the direction to the next one, and it de-stresses the situation, right? So you want to take the stress out of that for them. And it's the same as taking the stress out when you're working with a client. Questions?
Yes. Is stress ever good?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, there's some people who actually are able to use stress, and that's a good place to transition into the next thing. Because there's some people that they'll never do anything unless they feel there's some stress behind it. There's some, so with everything, right? There's a going towards and a going away, right? But there's some people that are very used to going away from problems. And that's where stress gets them moving. There's some people who can't work without stress. They can't operate without stress because they're so used to it. The question is, what are they doing with it? Right? So there's some people, they get used to having stress. So they either have to have a lot more stress. It's like a drug. In order to feel something, they actually have to feel a lot more stress, or they create situations where they get more stress. Like, say, for example, I know it's been a while since most of us have been in school, but when you have a deadline to do something, right? There's a lot of people, they'll put it off to the last minute. Right. And I used to do that quite a bit, and still it ends up sometimes happening. So, because there's other stuff going on and there's stuff that's more pleasurable to take care of going on. But it's that stress of, say, a deadline in this case, like if you set for yourself, Joanne, like for the book, right, that you want to have X amount of words done a day. that will provide a certain amount of stress, sometimes if you're not getting it, but it's not necessarily a bad stress, right? It allows you to prioritize and put things into perspective. What is necessary and what is desirable. So is desirable watching a show on Netflix, right? Or is it necessary compared to getting however many words you want in the book, right? And so I had set that from when I was doing my last book at a couple thousand words a day, right? But once I started going and I started using that stress properly, it actually helped guide me to getting the book to completion, right? And that's a useful kind of stress where it's actually a stress that you're going towards something and away from something at the same time. Now, stress is not good when it's only going away from stuff, because if you don't direct it properly, then you end up kind of just looping around and just feeling bad and not actually getting to where you want to go. So when you think in terms of going towards and going away, they're two sides of the same coin. And when you have both, that's you set up what's called a propulsion system. So you're going away from something at the same time as you're going towards something. And that's a really good way to actually work with your clients who are under stress too, because it's not the absence of stress that's important. It's what you do with it that's important, right? Because if you had absolutely no stress in your life, there'd be no reason to do anything and no reason to get anything done. As soon as you decide to get something done, then you've added stress, but you don't necessarily manage it properly unless you know where you want to go with it. And I think for a lot of people, that's actually the toughest thing, is because they haven't set out what they actually wanted. They're only trying to get away from something. They know what they don't want, but they haven't decided what they do want. Or they haven't admitted to themselves what they do want, which is sometimes when we work with clients, that actually is something that you have to dig out of them. Like, what do you want? Well, I don't want this. It's like, well, I know you don't want certain things. What do you actually want? And a lot of times people are used to denying themselves what they want. So they won't admit it to themselves that they want something. And it's okay to want something. It's not okay to like do bad things to get it. But it's certainly okay to want stuff. Then the question becomes, how do you use stress to get it? Right. And so that's where that, that prep work that we do when we talk to our clients comes in. Right. So I don't know about you, but I always start out working with a client. It's like, well, what do you want? Yeah. Well, I want to stop doing this. And that's, well, what do you want? Right. Because the stopping of doing something or not doing something is a consequence of setting out what you actually want. Because otherwise you're going to fall back into the old habits, which is having stress. Right? So those people who are achieving things that they want, it's not that they don't have stress, it's that they're using the stress properly. Right? It's like squeezing the toothpaste tube. Right? So if you didn't squeeze the toothpaste tube, the toothpaste doesn't come out. Right? So you got to put a little stress on it for it to come out. But if you put stress in the wrong place, then all this toothpaste gets stuck in the bottom and it's just a waste. So, good place for a question, if you have one.
I saw somebody on Facebook who was looking for a coach, but seemed to be under stress about it. They said, who can recommend a coach? And I don't want somebody charging $2,500 for half an hour a week. And that's all
Okay.
they wrote. It's the way I don't want.
Right. So what do you want? Somebody who wants charges 5,000? I'll call them up. I mean, really, so right. So then the question is, well, what do you actually want?
Yeah.
Or if somebody can fix your problem for $2,500, you know, where you don't have that problem anymore, is that worth it for you? Right. Or would
Exactly.
you rather pay somebody, you know, $300 an hour for the next 10 years?
It's true. If everyone's giving advice, go to this guy, do this, do that, but no one addressed the fact that he's telling everybody, help me, this is what I don't want. I don't want this, thank you.
Well, just say, what do you want? Well, I want a coach who doesn't charge 2,500. Well, I know somebody charges 5,000 or 10,000. Would that be better? Right. So
Yeah.
the question is, he hasn't thought about what he wants. He hasn't thought it through. Right. So he's only thought about what he doesn't want. So I would suggest one of the ways you work with people is, you know, again, right, the first condition of well-formedness, state, you know, what do they want stated in positive?
Yeah.
Right. Because otherwise, when they don't want something, they're going to be circling right back to what's familiar, which is what they don't want.
Mm.
So it comes down to, what do you want? Right? And a lot of that comes down to, what do you want? You know, most people are unhappy. They're saying, I'm not getting what I want. It's like, well, what do you want? They couldn't tell you. And the reason why is because they actually haven't thought about it. They've only thought about what they don't want. Which is often a cause for stress. Because they're thinking about all the stuff they don't want. They have this dialogue going on in their head. You know, it's like, oh, I don't want to do this type of job. And then they view themselves doing that type of job. Then they have this dialogue, oh, I hate my job, right? Causing stress. But they're causing it. It's not that it's already there. Because for somebody else who actually likes doing that stuff, that may be their dream job. So they have no stress doing it. Yes, John.
I have a potential client. She's not a client yet.
Okay.
A potential client who tells me she wants to get to the root cause of her anxiety.
Okay.
I'm probably going to be looking at a regression of some sort.
Yeah.
But if she doesn't really need a regression, I don't want her to relive some kind of a trauma from her childhood.
Well, a
But
trauma may not be.
could I ask her what she feels anxious about?
You say, how do you know you have anxiety at all?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Right.
How do you know it's not something else? How do you know it's not right? So as soon as you interrupt the pattern, right? If you ask them, well, how do you know it's anxiety? How do you know it's not just a bad memory that you keep playing over and over in your head?
Mm-hmm.
Because it could be that. It could be something that your unconscious is already resolved, but you haven't acknowledged that, you know, that it can let it go. Let's find out.
Right.
Right. But then you put her into trance and you can ask her, well, you know, how do you know it's anxiety? Well, I keep telling myself that. Okay, change the dial. Well, I keep telling myself to be anxious about that. It's like, okay, well, is this something that happens all the time? You know, does this happen in every situation? Oh no, just this situation. Okay, well, is that real, or is that something that you're imagining? Well, no, that's something that happened a long time ago. I imagined it again. Okay, so what happens when when you tell your unconscious, right? Talk to their unconscious. Use finger signals or something. You know how to do that. You
Mhm.
say, "Hey, is your unconscious okay with letting it go?" Yes. Right. In that case, it's more about taking control and telling them what to do. But at the same time, you've already started to interrupt the pattern.
Right.
Right. Then you could take them through different situations, right? In trance, where you actually test it out, right? And show them they have other resources and other ways to react and other ways to do things in different situations. Or even take them through different situations in the past where they, now that their unconscious is okay with letting it go, okay, so the next time you felt this, right, go back to there. How do you feel about it now? Oh, well, I'm fine. It doesn't bother me, right? So you're teaching them new skills on how to deal with the situations that's going to carry through to the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's fairly, it's again, think in terms of the process as opposed to what they're saying the problem is. Right. And that's, again, stress is a process. Anxiety is a process. Right. So how do you know to do this? Because in other situations, they wouldn't. They wouldn't feel anxious. They would feel something else.
Good.
So when you start putting in new stuff and have them play around with it in different scenarios, because it's all possible in trance, then you don't have to worry about it, because they will come up with better solutions when you direct them to better solutions. Because what they're doing now is they're coming up with worse solutions. It's all in their head because they haven't done it. They're just thinking in terms of, oh, well, in this situation, I'm going to have anxiety. Or in this situation, I'm going to have stress. When in fact, they don't. I mean, have you guys ever been in a situation where you thought something is going to be difficult or going to have to be stressful, and it turned out to be really easy?
Yes.
Well, what's the difference? Because before the event, you were building it up in your mind that it's going to be difficult. And yet when you got there, it was really easy. Just like that Zoom presentation.
Yes. Hmm.
Right? It's going to be really easy. And I understand why they want you to do it. And all it is, it's an inconvenience. But at the same time, it may turn out to be good, because you may actually be able to expand your client base to people you can't see by doing sessions on Zoom. And you'll
Right.
have the recordings of those sessions, which is actually something that's useful. Because for a lot of my clients, I send them a copy so they can go over it again.
Right.
And this way they can, if they didn't catch something or there's something that they had a question about, yeah, it's right there. I don't have to try to remember every last word I said or anything like that.
When I noticed that when you started the recording,
Mhm.
we got a little box that said, is
Yeah.
it okay with you?
Yeah.
So if I start a recording with a client and they hit okay, then I'm okay with recording it.
Well, realistically, are you recording it? See, I'd say for a therapeutic practice, if I was seeing somebody in person, I always record it, because this way nobody says anything inappropriate went on, right? Because it's recorded, right?
Right.
Like having a body cam. I do have a body cam, by the way. I just got one. because you never know what's going to happen.
Oh, boy.
Not a bad thing necessarily, right? So, but what happened is I think it's always a good idea to record, if only for your own records, and only because you may come up with something brilliant, and then it's like, oh, I did something really cool there. Oh, well, how exactly did I put that or whatever? And this way you can go back. It's not for publication or anything like that. Not like this stuff. It's not for putting out. It's just, for your own records, right? That's good to have. And if you're seeing clients in person, it helps prevent anybody from making any type of accusations about anything inappropriate.
But if I'm seeing a client on Zoom and
Yeah.
that client asks for the recording,
Yeah, send them a
then
copy.
they will see, wouldn't it be detrimental that they would see themselves having the problem all over again and seeing ourselves resolving it?
Most of the time they don't. Most hypnotists don't share the recording. It's
Right.
for your own records. And
Okay, got it.
I do it because mine are coaching calls. So I'm actually teaching people stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not just working with their problems, I'm also, teaching them. And I don't generally, for my coaching clients, I don't generally have them in trance. It's mostly conversational hypnosis. So they don't know they're in trance, not like
Right.
direct hypnosis. So that's why I do it. But again, I think it's useful because again, you at a certain point, you may want to do a book where you have some transcripts of, of your sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's easy to get because you can have it transcribed electronically and stuff like that.
Right. Another thing to learn.
Oh, no, that's really easy. You just upload it. You upload the recording and it comes back as a document.
Yeah. Hmm.
And they're not that expensive. It's come down quite a bit. Matt, questions, comments?
No, do you have a body cam for your meetings with?
No, I have a body cam in case I'm walking around. If I go up to New York, you never know.
Oh,
Crime is getting bad out there.
do you see a pattern? Do you see a pattern, James?
Well, I would also say in a certain sense, if I start again doing more in person when things open up, there may be a time when the body cam is actually more convenient than than setting up a camera.
Yeah.
It's convenience more than anything else. And you don't have to wear a body cam on your body. You can actually just put it on a shelf or something like that. But it's just, again, a smaller camera that's just easier to, logistically easier to take around with you if you want to. Rather than setting up a tripod and all that stuff. When I was in California, it was on tripod and everything. And it's kind of like, it works fine either way, but I mean, sometimes you may come up with a new process, on the fly. I've done that actually. And, it was good that it was recorded because you get some nuances. You get to see where you could have been a little bit more streamlined, or maybe some parts that you maybe should have gone into more. A lot of it's for your own development too.
Yeah.
Plus, again, if you're working with a member of the opposite sex or even the same sex in some places, you don't want anybody saying that you did anything inappropriate. It's to protect yourself.
Yeah.
Which will de-stress your life.
Hmm.
So any other questions? Let's make this interactive as possible.
No, as far as client work goes, getting into the submodality work is, what came before that and what came before that. I'm ready to rock and roll with that, because as I have been layering on things from the regression to reframing and various other techniques. I'm anxious is not the right word, but I'm ready to, do this next next thing with him.
I haven't found that that regression is necessarily the best thing to do for stress.
It's how the thing unfolded. I wouldn't have picked that, honestly. He was working with someone prior to me, and she had him. She referred him to me, and she had him go on this long walk prior to his meeting with me, and he came to the meeting saying, "I know what it is. It was when I was 4 years old." Da, da, da. So I started with that. That's why in this particular case.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, because okay.
Yeah.
I agree with you in this case then, because when you're working with a client's expectations, that's actually a good thing. That's why I say, okay, well, people ask me, do I do, regular hypnosis, like traditional, induction? And I say, if that's what the client wants, because it's easier, you just go with what they expect, right? So you're managing the expectation. It's like when he says, "Oh, I know what it was for." Great, sit down in the chair. Right? So you go with it, and then you can refer to it, right? And okay, so that's a good place to start. When you future pace him, start by going back to the 4-year-old, then start taking him through different situations with the new skill set. But I'm just saying in that I wouldn't have chosen that, because generally when people are feeling stressed, it's because they have a process. And so I want to get to their process rather than to the quote unquote root, right? Because you can get to the root cause of it, and if you don't change the process, they'll still feel it.
Yeah, I'm new at this guy, so now I've only had the one session with him, and I've been doing a few texts with him since, and I realized that the regression, that first time didn't really stick, and so I do get a sense, yes, that.
Well, I wouldn't say it wouldn't necessarily didn't stick. What he did was he went back to his ex-wife, which is a huge anchor for him.
Yeah.
So essentially he went back and, basically went back to something he's really anchored to.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where, again, it's changing that process. And then you can collapse the anchor as well that he has with her.
Yeah.
Right. And I would suggest in that case, because he's reacting to the way they interact, right? It's not necessarily where you could tell him, oh, well, now you're going to hate her. And that's, again, too big a dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
It's, again, where he's just neutral to her. Get him to be neutral to her. Right. So it takes that feeling out, so you can anchor into, like, when he's with her, he feels neutral. Right. Because again, most people say, okay, you're either love, hate. No. Right. What's the opposite of love? It's not hate. It's indifference. Right. So you take out that emotional charge. And you could do that with a regression, or something like that. It's taking out that emotional charge that he has with her. Right. So he can actually choose, if he wants, to go to a different nutritionist. Right. But she's a big anchor for him.
Yeah.
Obviously not positive, since they're divorced.
Well, it even came up in his regression. I mean, it was a big thing that he complained about. And I took him through the experience when I was future pacing him up the timeline. We went through the divorce period, and any other places that he wanted to hang out, on the timeline. And that was one of the places we hung out, or he hung out and tried on some of the new perspectives that we had come up with, that he had come up with. And he was feeling really good. And I guess that's what he was feeling good about the divorce in the session, and I guess that's why he got it in his head to run over to her
Right,
house.
but that's a different question.
Sorry.
Feeling good about the divorce is not feeling good about the relationship. The divorce is theoretically the end of the relationship. That's not, he's falling back into the pattern when they're together.
Good point. Yeah. It's a lifelong pattern that he had built up with her. True. The divorce was just sort of the one of the anchoring memories. Yeah.
Right. So listen to him literally. He's telling you stuff. He doesn't realize he's telling you, but he's telling you stuff. He feels good about the divorce. Right? How does he feel about the relationship?
Yeah.
And why is he still in a relationship? Why do they have a relationship? And how does he want it to be? Right? Gets back to, what do you want? How do you want it to be? Well, I want it to be where we're friendly, but I don't have any bad feeling. Fine. Then you can work with that.
Yeah.
Or maybe he doesn't want to feel any pullback to her at all, but he does. You can work with that. Yeah. He has, I want to be neutral to her. Okay, great.
Yeah. I'm going to find out first thing, all the, what do you wants.
Right. But again, that he's falling back to the familiar.
Yeah.
Good illustration of the point.
Yeah.
Joanne?
No, I'm good.
You good?
Yep.
We still have like half an hour, so questions on anything. It doesn't have to be on this topic.
Well, I mean, it's just a nerdy question. I mean, it's got really nothing to do with more of the intellectual side of stress, in terms of what we think stress is. And I would, without having spent any much time thinking about it, I would start down the road of incongruencies between what I want and what I'm doing, or what I want and what I'm thinking, or some sort of behavior or strategy is not conducive to what I truly want, and maybe I don't even really know what it is that I want, the person, and maybe not truly, maybe there is a want that is unrealized that's running the show in terms of subconsciously, but then on the upside, people are thinking they want something that they don't truly want, and there's some incongruency there, or conflict.
Well, yeah, that's one place it is. But again, stress is not, we're talking about it in the negative connotation. It's not necessarily always negative.
Well, yeah, well, in the negative connotation, right? Yeah, in this case, I'm speaking of the negative. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. And I don't disagree. I'm just saying that there's certain things, and it's in the language that we use. Coming through in the pinch, coming through in the clutch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are stressful situations, but that's when somebody actually, there's some people, they focus better when they're under stress.
Eustress is an actual term. I mean, eustress is EUSTRESS. Eustress. It's like having to wake up in the morning and you've got a job to do.
Hopefully you wake up in the morning, otherwise you wouldn't have any stress. But
Well, I'm sorry, I meant having to wake up in the morning and knowing that you have to go to a job is a good form of stress, in a sense. I mean, there's some.
Unless you don't like the job, right?
Well, no,
but here's the thing, right? But if you have something you're excited about, right? Yeah. That you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Physiologically, it's not really any different. Yeah. Excitement, Joanne, and stress, it's the value we put on that.
Right.
Right. So it becomes the process and the value we put on the results of that process. Right. So how do we learn to use it for when we want to do something? Right. And it goes down to, in many cases, the pictures and the dialogues that we have for each other. It's like when you start using your modal operators, right? Which I think we went over, but the modal operators are basically the types of words we use. They're motivational words. Most of the words that we use motivationally don't motivate us. They don't. Like if I tell you you should do something, that's not motivating. You basically say no, right? Some people, they'll do the things when they say I should do something. Some people do that. But if you tell yourself you can do something, that's more motivating than you should do something, right? Or you want to do something.
But,
Right.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
I don't know.
Let's talk a little bit about getting more substance in that question. What do you want? So let's say that people, because I've come across a lot of people who know what they don't want, and
Yeah.
they just don't know what it is that they do want.
They do. They just don't want to say it.
Well, okay. So how do we get them to say it? And let's talk about that a little bit. What are some scenarios where
That's where stress is a good thing, right?
Okay.
So if I ask you, what do you want?
What do I want? What do you mean? What do I want, James?
Well, you came here to see me for a reason. What do you want?
Oh, okay. I want to I want to habitually be positive in my thinking all the time. I want to have consistency. I want to recognize my internal submodalities. I want to have a lot of internal acuity as to what's going on with my feelings and my intuitions, and I want to be guided by my intuitions consistently. I want to pay attention to my inner guidance system, which I put a lot of credence in my intuitions. And I don't want to be caught up in old patterns that don't serve my higher good.
Okay, so how do you know you're caught up in patterns that don't serve your higher good?
I can tend to I've come to recognize feelings of anxiety or stress or fear, or some of the what I would consider to be negative feelings or emotions even. And when I've learned to use them as a prompt to move me towards what I do want. And,
Okay.
Yeah,
so you already have it.
yeah. So I don't know what I want now. I don't want anything else. That's all I want. I got everything I want.
Right.
I have arrived.
But you notice when I didn't say anything, you felt stress.
And that's a good thing, you mean?
That's a good thing. That's how you find it. You have to know when to shut up.
That was good. Oh, that was good. I see your point. It made me fill in the gaps, and yeah, it made me.
But it prompted you. It prompted you to speak.
That was a good technique. Yeah.
Right. It prompted you to speak. That's where you add. Some people call it stress. It's actually tension. Right. So you have to have some tension when you're eliciting what the person wants. Right. Because if you feel the tension too much and you start talking, that's not useful for you.
Right.
You want your client to feel the tension, so they'll talk. So sometimes it'll start coming out like you were just putting stuff together. Right. But in that, if you listen literally, you'll actually hear what that person wants, and there'll be a bit of a stress to it. And that's where you know to focus in on something. Right. So you told me you want to listen to your intuition. And I said, well, how do you know when you're not? Right. It's like, well, I've had, I can notice the negative stuff, right? Right. So that means that you already have a fine sense of your intuition.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I said, well, then you already have it.
Which is a nice compliment, James. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yes, Joanne.
Could you talk a little bit about stress versus overwhelm? When I feel overwhelmed, I feel a lot of stress. Is it the
Right.
same thing?
They're similar and related. So when you talk about overwhelm, generally you're talking about you're very associated into a situation where you're making really big pictures that are surrounding you. Right? It's in the word overwhelm. It's like this big wave of pictures, are basically, all around you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think about being overwhelmed and how that feels and what's going on. Right? You're seeing these big pictures, they're all around you, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now step back and watch yourself with the pictures around you.
Okay.
So now you're watching yourself. You see the pictures around you, but you're looking at it from outside your body, right?
Right.
How do you feel?
I feel more in control.
Yeah. So now from the outside, right? Reach out to those pictures and start shrinking them. Use your hands. Shrink them.
Okay.
Fast.
Okay.
How do they feel?
Manageable.
Now step into your body and you notice that they're much smaller, right?
Right.
Okay, now move them away from you so they're not surrounding you. Now
Okay.
put them in the order of things that you want to take care of and things that aren't important. So you know which ones are which, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the things that aren't important, just throw them away. Now, how does it feel?
Much better. More
Right.
in control.
Right. So now, out of those ones that still remain, which ones are easy to take care of?
Right.
So just
Okay.
move them into one spot. And which ones might be more difficult, but manageable?
All right.
Okay, which ones are ones that you have no control over? Right. So now
Okay.
you know which ones are which, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the ones that you have no control over, since you have no control over them, are the things you should, worry about. You can let it go, right?
Right.
Right. So now the things that you can control, which one would be the best one to take care of first?
Right.
Is it hard?
Not really.
Right. So a lot of times with overwhelm, it has to do with the pictures that we make and the dialogues that we create with ourselves. Because you had all these pictures surrounding you where they were coming over all around you, and you were probably telling yourself, oh, which one do I do first? What do I do first? What am I going to do? Right? Which is not necessarily useful dialogue. So what you did was you used your submodalities by disassociating from it, right? So you're stepping back and watching yourself. Then you started shrinking down the pictures so they're manageable. And then you started sorting them. And when you sort them, then it becomes a process of, oh, that's not so important. That wasn't so important. That's easy. I can't do anything about that. So I'm not going to worry about that. Right? As opposed to them just being all around you, surrounding you and coming over you.
Right.
Pretty simple. Right? But nobody ever teaches us that stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we should have learned in college. They should teach some of these things in college.
Yes, but they don't. You see, that goes back towards should, right?
Hmm.
That rarely happens.
Right.
Right? People should do certain things and yet they don't. Right? So that a lot of that goes towards the dialogue. It's like, so you probably had it in the dialogue. It's like, oh, what am I going to do? You should do this. You should do this. You should do this. And it's, rarely, it does happen with some people, but rarely is should a motivating word. Because from the time we're little kids, we're told we should do stuff. And as we grow up, it's kind of like, well, I don't want to. Well, you should. And it becomes kind of a connotation that doesn't work for most of us. Hello, Mark.
Good evening, everybody. My apologies for my lateness.
Oh,
I
that's
was
all right.
my work Zoom went overtime.
Well, that happens. So that's why there's a recording.
I look forward to it. I missed a big chunk, apparently.
Well, that's okay. You'll get it. You can watch it in your leisure.
Cool.
What's that?
Well, that's a good question. If you want more leisure time, then you have to set out that time.
You have to make time.
Well, exactly. Just like everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, questions. This has been fun because it's been more interactive today. So that's the difference between overwhelm and stress, right? So overwhelm causes what we call stress, right? So overwhelm had to do with what's going on. Stress was how we interpret that. Right? So that's the process that starts happening as we interpret that. Because for some people, right, when they make big pictures of stuff happening, they get excited about it. Maybe it depends on the picture. You have to have better pictures.
Right.
But when that changed, when you took control over it, did you feel stress?
No.
Right?
No, I was in control.
Yeah. So a lot of times people feel stressed because they feel that they're not in control. When in fact they're absolutely in control because they're creating the stress response through the process that they're creating. Whereas when we saw before, what's the difference between stressed and excited? It becomes the value you put on it. Because the feeling is not that different. Just like between fear and excitement, it's not that different.
Is that a? Sorry, I don't know if you're ready for another question yet.
Yeah.
Is that another way of saying that, there's something good. There's a good side to anything that you consider to be bad. So if you looked at stress and you considered it in a negative light, there's a way of taking that as a starting point and finding what it is that you do want.
What happens? Think about it this way, right? That's a good question. What happens when people have stress? They want to get away from it, right? Generally, they want to get away from it, right? So they're going away from something.
Right.
Where they get into problems is when they don't set out what they're going towards.
Right.
Right. So that's
they haven't visualized it. They haven't verbalized it. They haven't felt it. They don't know what they're looking for and a feeling about it.
Yeah, they just have no idea.
Yeah.
Right. Because they haven't done the second part of the equation to make it useful. So that's one of the reasons why you get people who keep getting themselves into the same situation over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you get people who jump from job to job to job, right? Because they feel stress at a job. They jump into the same job somewhere else thinking it's going to be different, but it's the same job or a very similar job. It's going to have the same type of stresses. And they're going to run from that one. They say, well, that's too stressful. That's too stressful. That's too stressful. Whereas if they find the thing they want to do, they won't actually interpret the obligations and the duties and all that stuff that go into that job they'll be interpreting it as something that is part of the job and something they enjoy.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's where you get people who, are adrenaline junkies.
Right.
Right. What I probably would feel is insanity, like doing certain things that they do, they enjoy.
Right.
I would feel stress having to do what they do. They
Yeah.
they feel it's incredible. Right. So
Yeah.
when you take going away from what we would call stress, right,
Mhm.
and direct it in the right direction, then it becomes something very useful.
Right. 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 Yes. And so that shift from away to towards,
You want both.
you want both.
Right.
And
So it became very popular with, some of the early NLP stuff, especially Tony Robbins, and people go, "Oh, you're an away from person, you're a towards person." Nobody is just one. Everybody is both. The question is, do you know what you're going away from? And do you know what you're going towards?
right. But my point is with the starting point of stress as the opener, right?
Yeah.
As the beginning.
So how would you like to feel?
Right. Yeah, I guess. Exactly. Simple as that. So stress. Well, how would you rather feel instead?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Obviously. So the opposite of what you're, yeah.
Well, it's not the opposite, it's the completion, right?
Yeah.
Think of
Don't
it as
use
the
the word opposite. Right?
completion of the equation,
Yeah.
right?
What do you
Because
like to do that?
if you don't have both, right, then it's like, oh, I'm going towards something, I'm going towards something, going towards something, right? Most of the people who are always going towards something, they'll have something else they're going towards pretty soon.
Right. So I mean, the wording would be, well, what do you want instead?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just what do you want? Like they can fill that in.
Well, I'm
Gotta
feeling
know when
stressed
to
about,
gotta
you know,
know when to
I'm
not
feeling
talk.
stressed about this job. Well, what do you want instead?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you want instead?
So you start with the negative, and it gives you the
Sometimes.
outcome. Yeah.
Sometimes. What are you not getting then? Sometimes, right? It comes down to asking the question and putting the pressure on them to answer, because they have to make it so they have to come up with the answer.
Mhm.
Because if they're not giving you the information, how do you know what to give them?
And then then you can follow up with what it is that you want. Then it's, well, how do you know when you got it? How do you know when you're there? Yeah. How are you going to know when you have that?
Yeah.
Then you get into submodalities.
Well, you have to have them clarify, right? Because if they're too general, then if they don't know when they're there, how are you going to know when they're there?
Yeah, and then well formed and all of that too.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Joanne, you have a question?
No,
No.
no.
Disappointed. You have good questions.
Want me to make one up?
Yeah, make one.
Yeah. I'm racking my brain here to make one up.
You're putting stress on me, James.
Or is it excitement?
Yeah.
Right? For the new things, right? So
I'm excited that I'm going to learn something new.
yeah. And thing is, play with it. It's very forgiving, right? If it's being recorded, right, and it's your account and you're not happy with it, you could do it again.
Get rid of it and do it again.
Yeah. Or not get rid of it and do it again, because there may be some good stuff that you can reuse. That's the point.
Right.
I mean, everything that you do, and when you're working with people or when you're doing a presentation, most when it becomes spontaneous, there are gems there.
Yeah.
And that's where, if you have the capacity to go back, these are things you may have a whole new book out of it,
Mm,
right? You don't know yet.
right.
And that's why it's good to have it, because when you don't have it, you end up regretting it often.
I think that's where the creativity, the new stuff happens when we're spontaneous in the now, and it's not just regurgitating of old stuff. I find a lot of new and innovative ideas and solutions come from just, I would never have thought of them had I had not just been sort of tuned into the present moment. And if it's not recorded, yeah, I would have lost it.
Well, pretty much this whole thing is unscripted. I mean, I know how I want to start it, but you know, the fun is, where does it go in the interaction and what we're talking about. So this has been fun for me.
Yeah,
That's fun for me too.
Good.
me too. Me too.
Me too.
So any questions, Rich, Mark, Richard?
What if somebody has a stress making calls? Illogical.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. You talk about like a cold call or something?
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, it's because they're already envisioning things going bad. So they're running a movie in their head, or somebody yelling, where somebody's yelling at them and hanging up on them and all that type of thing.
Right.
Right. So I would suggest that, again, it goes towards what question they're asking themselves beforehand. Because if they're anticipating it being bad, it's probably going to be bad. But if they just think not in terms of, I have to call this person and sign them up for whatever or sell them something. If they say, what's this person like? I get to meet a new person. What's this person like? That's going to change how they approach the call.
Nice.
I wonder what this person's like. Let's see. Right. And again, it goes towards smaller steps. If the person is having anxiety or stress over making calls, a lot of times that has to do with, because they're thinking in terms of what they want. Right. They want to sign up somebody, they want to sell a house or whatever. In this case, I would suggest, say, they start with just being curious. What's this person like?
Very nice.
Right. And then, how can I help this person? How can I be of service to this person? It's very different than, what can I sell this person? And if the two interests happen to meet, that's perfect. If not, that's okay too. Because maybe once you get to know the person, you'll be able to do something in the future. Right.
I
But
have a question for Rich. Is he talking about a cold call to a client to get them to list the house with them?
Yeah.
Or-
Yes. Exactly that.
Okay.
yeah. So if the person is just saying, look, this is what I do. I'm not sure, you're interested in listing your house or not. I'd love to get to know you. And, I'm happy to be a resource for you in the future. Right. It's a very different context than somebody calling, say, hey, do you want to list your house? Right. This is what I do. I don't know if you know anybody who's interested, because the market is very hot right now. So yeah, I'd love to get to know you. Right. Different call. It's a very different call. Because maybe that person's actually looking to buy a house. Yeah, no. Right.
And then you can help them too.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Right.
So again, think in terms of smaller steps, because the smaller steps don't feel stressful. It's that big jump to the end goal
Yeah,
that's stressful,
that's true.
right?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And it's the same way when you're working with clients. A lot of times when people start working with clients, they want to have, oh, well, this person wants this change. And they think in terms of going from, A to Z. It's like, no, but there's a lot in between.
Yeah.
And so it's taking them through the process that makes the change, not just like jumping in and then saying, okay, I did an intervention and now I expect the person to be totally different. Right? Because life doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Mark, any questions?
Not at this moment. I'm just have to wait for the recording.
Okay, well, it'll be up. It'll be up. So, any last questions? This has been really good, I think.
Great.
We talked a lot about stress and, its uses, and it's not really as big a thing, than people say, because it's just something that we're doing.
Mm.
And if we're doing it, that means we could do something else
Mhm.
and give other meanings to it, right? Where it actually helps us and helps us to get to where we want to go.
Mhm.
You're a good man, James.
Well, thanks, Matt. So if that's it, then I will see you at the next one. If you have any suggestions for topics, please let me know, because it takes my stress out this way.
Okay,
Okay, thanks.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take
Okay,
care.
see you next
Thank
time.
you, everybody. Have a good night and see you guys next time.
See you next time.
Thanks, James.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.